Hold on a minute. La, la, la. Let me just grab my ruler, make sure I'm precisely 12 inches away from the mic capsule. Yes, that should do it. Perfect. Now I can begin. The Relentless Perfectionist. Think Hyacinth Bouquet from Keeping Up Appearances. A classic example is when she hosts one of her famous, fiercely managed candlelit suppers. Before a single guest arrives, she spends hours in a state of hyper-anxiety, obsessing over the precise placement of the Royal Doulton china, terrorising her husband Richard over minor breaches of etiquette, and frantically hiding her eccentric family members in the back room. She entirely sacrifices the genuine enjoyment of the evening and the comfort of her family solely to present a flawless veneer to her neighbours and avoid any shred of external criticism. Hello, it's your leadership coach, Estelle Read, and host of Optimising Leader Brilliance, the place for calm, confident, and strategic leadership. Stay tuned to the end for a mini coaching and reflective practice. Find out more about my services by heading over to estelleread.com. Welcome to this mini-series on the 7 leadership saboteurs, which is based on my work coaching leaders for over 2 decades. Please relax and be easy. Most people have at least one saboteur running the show. I know I certainly had several. And there'll be moments when we get real and moments where I make light of a pattern, because our saboteurs can make us behave in some curious ways. In each episode, I'm going to share the data and show you how to recognise these patterns in yourself and others, the impact they can have, and how they create a false ceiling over your true potential. Then we'll shift gears to how we solve it and look at the science of why these habits are so difficult to break using traditional methods, but also how you can overcome this. And I'll give you 3 actionable strategies you can practice to unlock your next level of growth. So let's get started. Hold on a minute. La, la, la. Let me just grab my ruler, make sure I'm precisely 12 inches away from the mic capsule. Yes, that should do it. Perfect. Now I can begin. The Relentless Perfectionist. Think Hyacinth Bouquet from Keeping Up Appearances. A classic example is when she hosts one of her famous, fiercely managed candlelit suppers. Before a single guest arrives, she spends hours in a state of hyper-anxiety, obsessing over the precise placement of the Royal Doulton china, terrorising her husband Richard over minor breaches of etiquette, and frantically hiding her eccentric family members in the back room. She entirely sacrifices the genuine enjoyment of the evening and the comfort of her family solely to present a flawless veneer to her neighbours and avoid any shred of external criticism. So, I'm currently running a scorecard on each saboteur, which you can access for free in the link in our show notes or head over to estelleread.com. It takes just 3 minutes to complete and you get a customised report, and it's all for free. So far, 4% of leaders completing the questionnaire experience this pattern as their primary saboteur, which means it currently sits in 5th place on our saboteur charts. With this pattern, the leader sets impossibly high standards for themselves but also for others. The leader is driven by an intense need to avoid flaws, errors, criticism, which results in endless analysis, tweaking and refinement. And if you're reflecting on the people in your personal life, this might look like someone criticising the way their child dresses, desperately trying to present the home life as flawless, you know, those Instagram accounts, or maintaining highly managed, inauthentic conversations that appear to smooth over any cracks in the work or life, with everything being fine, marvellous and fabulous, darling. So, what's the impact? This saboteur drives overwork, dissatisfaction, and intense frustration when things fall short are flawless. It acts as a performance ceiling by slowing down execution and causing friction within teams who feel they can never meet the standard because, let's face it, what is perfect anyway? Now, the irony of the relentless perfectionist is that their impossibly high standards actually prevent them from delivering high performance. Who'd have thought? By obsessing over minor details and creating mistakes as catastrophic failures, they slow down productivity, make those around them feel they're not good enough, and create a risk-averse culture where innovation dies and team growth is stunted. Not to mention the ever-growing to-do list and time evaporation both at work and in the personal life, because being perfect takes time, doesn't it, folks? For example, one leader who recently had been promoted was finding it hard to step up strategically. This was primarily because they were trapped in the weeds of the team's mistakes. Whenever a team member produced any work, this leader would review it, and I mean absolutely everything, with a fine tooth comb. Now, instead of feeding back where the errors actually were, partly due to a fear of conflict, which, by the way, is a classic trait of the chronic harmoniser, coming up in episode 5 of this mini-series, they decided it would be simpler to fix it themselves. How often do we do that, folks? Oh, it'll be quicker for me to do it myself. And this is such a common trap for new leaders. They fail to trust their people and struggle to let go of minor errors, completely bypassing those vital mentoring periods where transitional growing pains, they just need to be ironed out. So what's the root cause? Well, this pattern often originates in childhood environments where affection, praise, or safety were highly conditional on the achievement of flawless behaviour. It frequently triggers in leaders who grew up with highly critical parents or within rigid academic systems where mistakes were heavily penalised rather than treated as valuable opportunities to learn. I've heard so many stories from clients about school grades being publicly displayed on walls or children being actively punished by teachers and parents simply for not understanding a concept. You have to ask yourself, does that adult really think that instilling fear in a child will help them learn any faster? All it actually does is wire the brain for anxiety. For example, the leader I mentioned earlier was repeatedly told by their parents that they were expected to achieve the absolute best grades out of all of the children. On one occasion, when the grades slipped slightly and they became visibly upset because they hadn't achieved the usual A-star score, the family collectively criticised, shamed, and laughed at them for being a crybaby. Now, that painful experience built an internal pressure to always be flawless at everything, both in work and in life, solely to avoid ever feeling that level of humiliation and shame again. So let's talk about the science and why breaking these habits can be challenging. If you've listened to previous episodes, feel free to skip forward. But if this is your first time here, you'll definitely want to hear this. Because let's face it, if changing behaviour was easy, we'd just make the change, wouldn't we? We get stuck at some point in our career or business. We either reach a plateau, lose motivation, or hop between shiny new strategies without honing and refining what we're doing until it works. Alternatively, we hesitate to take the next step, held back by a lack of motivation or underlying anxiety about the risks of failure. This is inner stuff getting in the way of outer results. Now, when I qualified as a coach over 20 years ago, I quickly became frustrated. Leaders would identify a great strategic plan but fail to follow through. This inaction turned valuable coaching conversations into a bit of a waste of time and ultimately leaving them hitting a ceiling. That was when I began noticing the 7 leadership saboteurs, the unconscious patterns that get in the way of us reaching our next level. I realised it was no good simply having a plan. I needed to find a way to help leaders remove the self-sabotage patterns that create that false ceiling. The challenge of lasting behaviour change, your autopilot. We all know that changing a habit is challenging. The average person needs to practice a new behaviour for at least 66 days before it completely becomes automatic. This poses 2 distinct problems for busy leaders. Number 1, the time crunch. Leaders are already overstretched and lack time required for long, grueling behavioural adjustments. Just imagine for a moment if you follow the chronic harmoniser pattern, having to consciously say no 66 times before it feels natural, or picking up the phone 66 times to make that difficult call if you experience the strategic procrastinator. That requires an immense amount of pure grit and determination. Problem number 2, the autopilot effect. Most of the time we operate on autopilot, remaining consciously aware of only 1% of our behaviour. The rest is handled entirely by our unconscious mind. For example, when you drive to work, do you consciously think mirror signal manoeuvre, or does your autopilot just take care of it for you? This makes it difficult to catch a behaviour we want to change, let alone actually alter it in the moment. So what's the solution? Modifying your autopilot with neuroscience. 12 years ago, I discovered a neuroscience-based technique called havening. It resets the nervous system and clears the blocks to your desired results, enabling you to break through that performance ceiling. And it works because it directly targets 2 distinct challenges. Number 1, the time crunch. Instead of relying on 66 days of continuous conscious effort, we used focus coaching sessions, averaging around 4 sessions, to directly address and clear the root cause of the self-sabotage pattern at a neurological level. Number 2, the autopilot effect is resolved. Instead of having to constantly remember to change a behaviour that is on autopilot 99% of the time, we just adjust the programming of the autopilot itself. By delinking the emotional past that created the saboteur, we remove the active trigger from your behaviour. And this creates automatic, lasting shifts in your beliefs, feelings and workplace actions. Now, if you're naturally sceptical about this, I completely understand. I was too. And I tried so many traditional coaching and psychological techniques over the years, and I'm qualified in a lot of them, but nothing seemed to deliver permanent results. But when I personally tried to recover from my own saboteur-induced burnout, havening was the shift that worked. It is the core methodology I now use with my executive coaching frameworks. And the real beauty of this approach is it doesn't require you to rely on willpower. Instead, by working together, we clear the underlying neurological triggers. The behavioural shift will occur naturally, allowing you to simply stand back and enjoy and notice the positive changes in how you lead. So, what happened to my client? Before addressing this pattern, they were constantly stuck in the weeds of the team's mistakes, unable to provide direct feedback and choosing instead to do all the corrective work themselves. This bottleneck stalled a vital transformation project, eventually forcing the boss to intervene. To make matters worse, the team was unwilling to take direction from this new leader because they lacked respect for their passive communication style. This was the heavy influence of the chronic harmoniser bleeding through. It meant the leader was so snowed under and behind on key measurables that they missed out on spending precious time with the kids over the summer holidays. However, after undergoing havening to address the root trigger, they reported feeling like a proper boss. They were no longer afraid of the team or of themselves making mistakes. They finally handed over a number of files that should have belonged to the team members all along. They clearly communicated that they would fully support the decisions, openly admitting that while there would invariably be mistakes along the way, they would tackle them and learn from them together. The leader also noticed themselves naturally saying no and disagreeing with team members, expressing their true opinions rather than a sanitised version designed not to upset anyone. Now, interestingly, the leader could not believe they were suddenly behaving this way without any conscious effort. They actually asked me to run through the science again because they've been telling all the mates about how their life and their work had dramatically changed for the better. Not only are they fully able to switch off and be with the children, they leave the laptop at the office, but they've also reclaimed some time entirely for themselves to take up a hobby. And for the first time in years, they're enjoying a few rare dates with the partner. Coming up, if you would prefer to take the traditional route to conquer your saboteur, I'm going to share 3 strategies you can practice. But before we do that, if you're ready to take the next step, you've got 3 options. Number 1, if you want to know for sure if this pattern is your primary roadblock, take my free 7 saboteurs scorecard. It takes just 3 minutes to get your customised leadership report. Number 2, if you want to know what we do on the Optimised Leader Programme Next Level, head over to my website. Number 3, you can book a free 30-minute leadership discovery call where we'll deconstruct your scorecard to trace the root causes of your current workplace triggers, reset your nervous system with a quick sample of the neuroscience technique I use, Havening, and explore future growth with a brief overview of the programme, with absolutely no hard feelings if this is not for you. Just head over to estelleread.com or the show notes to get started and access all of those things. Here are 3 strategies you can practice to overcome this saboteur. If you really want to nail this pattern, can I suggest, number 1, setting a reminder to practice. Remember, we're only 1% conscious choice. And 2, to practice for at least 66 occasions or days so that you create that neural pathway of competence that fires automatically and becomes your updated autopilot. Number 1, the good enough benchmark. Before starting a task, explicitly define what a successful version 0.10 looks like. Force yourself to stop working once you hit that baseline rather than spending hours tweaking it. Number 2, time box your refinement. Set a strict 15-minute timer for a final review of a document or project. When the timer rings, you must send or publish it as it stands. Number 3, celebrate lessons from errors. Intentionally look for a recent minor mistake made by your team. Openly address it as a useful learning point and consciously praise the team's effort to break their fear of failure. So that brings us to a close. The next episode coming up focuses on the doubting imposter. If you'd like to be notified when the next episode drops, remember to subscribe. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with someone who might benefit. Finally, if any of these topics have sparked your interest and you'd like to work with me, you can apply for a free discovery call at estelleread.com. Let's see if we're a good fit. You'll also find plenty of free resources there. I'm Estelle Read, executive coach, speaker and best-selling author, and this has been the Optimising Leader Brilliance podcast. Thanks for listening. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Please consult with a qualified professional for any specific advice related to your situation.